Working on a 2007 GMC Yukon XL with the 5.3. It's got a misfire, engine lights flashing. If you hook up the scan tool, it's cylinder 1 there. It actually has a P0300, but if you look at the live data for the GM program, it's cylinder 1's misfiring. It's got a new plug, swap coils, still misfiring. I believe it's got a dead cylinder. I don't know if it's a valve issue, head gasket, or rings, or something along those lines. So what we're going to do now is have my amp clamp hooked up to my oscilloscope. What we're going to do is we're going to do a clear flood crank. We're going to go ahead, he's going to smash the gas pedal all the way to the floor. Hold it all the way to the floor, and then he's going to crank it till I tell him to stop. Go ahead. And you can hear the audible tone that it's got a dead cylinder. All right, stop. So I zoomed in. Here's all your 8 cylinders. That's cylinder 1. How do I know it's cylinder 1? Well, I know from the scan tool that it's cylinder 1. If I didn't know which cylinder it was, I could put a second channel off this ignition coil right in the firing order and trace it on here. I've done that in other videos, but all these humps should be even, meaning they're relative to each other. This one's, there's no compression there. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and pull the plug out and do a mechanical compression check, and then do a leak down check and see if it's an intake valve, exhaust valve, head gasket, rings, or this has V4 mode. Cylinders, I know cylinder 1 on the side shuts off. There's 2 on this side, 2 on the other bank. I think it's 1 and 7 that shut off on this bank here, the driver's side bank. Maybe it's something with that, maybe it's not, but we'll go from there. So now we're going to do a mechanical compression check, but I forgot to tell you earlier, when I hooked up my amp clamp, you always go around the positive battery cable. The reason is that's what goes to the starter, and you want good humps because it takes amperage to make good humps to turn that engine over. And if there's a cylinder that's got a, no compression or a dead hole, it's not building compression, you would have not many amperage, not much amps or any amps at all. So now what we're going to do is he's going to smash it to the floor again so it doesn't start. So you go ahead and crank it over till I say to stop. Stop. And if you look on the gauge, dude, I don't even think it moved. Maybe like it flickered, maybe like 1 or 2 psi. It moved a little bit. It's about 10, 20, 30, about 5 to 10 psi. Obviously that's bad. So now, I mean, you could check another cylinder, but you're going to have well over 120, 130, 140, 150. Depends what this specifications are. But it's not supposed to be 5 to 10, which we're getting. It's not even barely enough to register on the gauge. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a leak down test to determine where, like I said, if it's intake valve, exhaust valve, head gasket, rings, or what's going on. So what we're going to do now is find top dead center on the compression stroke and get that all set up. All right, so we hooked up the cylinder leak down test, cylinder 1, air compressor. We set the gauge here to 0. I've got to set it to 0 still, actually. Back this off. Set it to 0 here. Sorry, I had to grab my assistant. He's usually always sidetracked with stuff. All right, so we're going to set this to 0 with the compressor hooked up. Close there, lock it. We're going to hook this gauge up down here. Watch the gauge with the camera. You don't want more than 25% leakage. And we are at 30, 25, 30, almost 35%, almost roughly. So we did it earlier at around 40%. So it's on the high side, even though it shows green. 25% leakage is bad. But what you do now is you give some air pressure here. And then you listen. If it's in the intake, you'll hear you're leaking out the intake. If it's in the exhaust, you hear it out the exhaust. If you hear it in the coolant bottle, it's a head gasket. If you hear it where the oil level is, which we hear it right here, and it's more than likely it's rings. So I don't know if you can hear that in the camera, but that's where it's, if you can hear it there. That's where it's leaking at. So looks like it's bottom end rings. So we'll have to go over and see what needs to be done. So I want to do another check. I know our compression was low on cylinder 1, which is right here. We only got 5 psi, and we did a leak down check, and we got, you shouldn't have more than 25%, but we got 30, 35, sometimes 40%. I would imagine we get that on a lot of the cylinders, only because it's got 180 some thousand miles on it. It's probably a little, it's worn out, not completely worn out, but I believe there's a valve issue, and I'll show you why. But also, I did bore scope the cylinders, 1 and 3, 3 being good, 1 being no compression, and they looked pretty close to the same. Sometimes 1 looked worse, the one that has no compression. That's only because the way the camera light was with my camera and my bore scope. So I don't, if the ring was actually broken, it would be really gouged up in there, and I just think you'd have a lot of other signs and symptoms. So this arm right here, when we crank this over, it's not moving. So when I crank it, he's going to move the camera. You're going to see all these other valves move except this one. That's the intake valve going to the intake. The exhaust one moves, but not the intake. So I'm going to go ahead and get in the vehicle. Go ahead and check that out. Hopping in right now. And I'm going to crank. So if you noticed, all these valves are moving except this one right here. So you can see in the video, like I said, this one wasn't moving. So what we're going to do now, I think it's a stuck lifter. We're going to go ahead and pull this rock arm off, pull the push rod out, and see what's going on. Now, why did we get 5 psi on this one? No compression. I mean, obviously the valve's closed, but the valve needs to open for the intake valve, which is this one, that's stuck, to suck air in to actually build up compression, which is what which is not happening. So pull this rocker arm off. Take a look. I noticed on this push rod too, I don't know if you can see in the video, the push rod looks like it's up against the head hole there pretty good on the left there, and the one on the right there, it looks like it's centered more. So is it a push rod issue, hydraulic lifter stuck, broken, or is it a camshaft issue? We'll go ahead and pull that rock arm off and take a look, and then go from there. Alrighty, one more thing before we pull it. You can see how loose this rocker arm is. It does get tight when you crank the engine over to certain spots, but it is really, really loose. And I can kind of push back on it a little bit in the hydraulic lifter, so I can feel a little resistance there. We're going to go ahead and pull the rocker arm off. So I went ahead and pulled off the rocker arm, 8mm bolt, pulled it off out of that hole right there, and I went ahead and pulled the rocker arm, or the push rod, I mean. It's a little bent. So there's the problem. Push rod's completely bent. You see a pretty good groove right there from rubbing in the head. That's why it looked like it was at an angle. And I don't know if you can tell, I might have to get a bore scope. I can't really, maybe you can see in there. You can see the lifter there, down that hole, towards the center of the screen, left side center screen. It's all loose in there. So what we can do now, hopefully, is we'll pull the intake. we'll pull this valley pan cover right here, down there. See if you can get to the lifter. Get a new hydraulic lifter, push rod. Make sure nothing else is broken and make sure the cam's good. See if we can salvage this. And then go from there. So we may not have to pull off the intake or the valley pan. We don't know yet. This lifter may be good. So cylinder 1 and 7 on the side is the fuel management deactivation. So 1 doesn't have its normal hydraulic lifter. It has a special hydraulic lifter with a spring on it because it shuts those cylinders off when it goes to V4 mode. That's one of these ones. The other ones have normal hydraulic lifters. This one doesn't. But if I put this extension here, carbon drive extension, I can center this thing back up and I can fill it. If I turn the engine over by hand, this moves up and down. So maybe we just need a new push rod. We'll have to do some more troubleshooting on that, put a push rod in and go from there. But there'll be another part to this video. We'll take a look at this push rod. Worst case, we have to pull the intake, go to the valley, look at some more stuff. But we're going to troubleshoot this with another push rod and then go from there. Alright, so we got the new rock arm. We put it in. It's in there, but you can see there's still a ton of play. Way excessive. So what does that mean? Actually get a light in here a little bit better. You can see the push rod there. I don't know if I said rock arm or I meant push rod. We got a new push rod. But there's a ton of play. What that means is that hydraulic lifter is collapsed. So it's collapsed. There's probably all that play in there. That's why this engine was ticking. And then it just smashed that push rod and destroyed it all. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull the valve covers off, the coils are off. I'm going to go ahead and rip the intake off, the valley pan gasket cover, exhaust manifold, because you got to pull the head off to get to the lifters. We'll go on there. Hopefully there's nothing else ruined and we can see what's going on and just hopefully replace the lifter. And Evan's going to help us, right buddy? So that'll be it for this video for part 1. We'll make another video for part 2 showing removal and repair of this vehicle. Alright, so now we're taking the engine apart to get to that lifter. So we took off obviously the valve cover like we said, coil, ignition coils, valve cover. I'll hook the injectors. We're taking the throttle body off right now. Go ahead and take that bolt off, buddy. Okay. Take off the air intake tube, the alternator, the bracket. Just going to continue to disassemble, and then once we get it disassembled, we'll get all these bolts out for the intake and pull that off.
Dad, which one do I do?
All right, go ahead and remove those intake bolts now.
Okay.
Go. Stop. Do the next one right here. Hang on, buddy. This way. Okay, go. Alright, so we got the manifold off. Not the manifold, yeah, the intake manifold. So we'll clean all that up. Evan's going ahead and removing the valley pan there. Take them all the way out, buddy. Remove the valley pan. And then we'll take a break for now. After that, come back the next day. We'll pull the exhaust manifold, the collector down there, pull the head bolts, pull that all the way.
Just use your hand, bud. It's not coming in
and all
anymore.
the rocker arms and all
there
that stuff. Alright, so we got the valley pan off. So you can see the cam there. A couple lobes. But you can't pull that lifter out until you pull the head. So we're going to pull the exhaust next. The coolant passage there. Pull the head bolts, pull the head off, and hopefully we can fix it. But we'll go from there.